Are you sure I will hear the cry of a baby in this palace before I finally join my ancestors? The king called the queen to his chambers and complained about the fact that the queen had not conceived since he was crowned the king of Umu. The queen did not have any words to say to him. She had already decided to leave everything to the gods and stop bothering herself. After going through sleepless nights just for her plea to be heard by the gods, it was as if they had all decided to neglect her. After moments of silence, she excused herself from the king's presence and went back to her usual routine, which was crying herself to sleep every night and waking up with tears. She knew he really needed a male child, but she was not concerned. She had asked the gods to provide her with any child at all, be it a boy or a girl. It went on for another month, and King Ikena saw that his wife might not even conceive. He decided that he would give her until another 3 market days, and if everything still remained the same, then he would need to find a second wife. If the condition remained the same, he would find a 3rd one and even a 4th one until he was able to have a child of his own. King Ikena even informed the queen about his plan, and she could not blame him. She accepted to challenge Alabama, the goddess of fruitfulness, by offering sacrifices to her for 3 weeks. If nothing still happened, she would assume she was not meant to have a child. On the first day, she gathered some items like a white hen, cola, white chalk, and other items she could find. She journeyed to the great Alabama stream, which was a bit far from the village. She did not mind the fact that the road was hilly, and climbing to the stream would mean she would sacrifice her leg as they would get swollen from straining themselves during the journey. She climbed all the way to the village stream and dropped the items for the sacrifice there. It was said that if a person is bold enough to climb up the hill and make sacrifices to the great Alabama, such a person will not just go home the same. But the villagers did not find the courage to climb up there because climbing up required courage. One of her most trusted maids called one day and asked, "My queen, the first have been hiding to see you climbing the hill to the stream of our great mother Alabama. Are you sure all the sacrifices you take there will work out?" "Well, let's just see how it goes," she said. The queen, being a peaceful person, did not let the maid's words affect her. She believed in the will of the gods and smiled at her maid before continuing on her way. The maid, perceiving the queen's demeanor as a sign of concern, offered prayers for her request to reach the gods. The second day was no exception. The queen woke up with leg pains but did not bother. She had to carry out the sacrifice for 3 weeks, and she was bent on making sure she did not miss a day for the sacrifice. She got up early in the morning, started preparing her items for the sacrifice. She made sure no one was in sight, and then she took the items and hurriedly climbed the hill again. This time, her legs were heavy and walking up there was a very difficult task. It was just day 2 and the bones in her body had awoken to destruction, but she did not mind. She started climbing, stopping at interval to rest. It was now a war between her body and spirit. As she remembered what she had hoped for, it gave her more strength to continue the journey, as she breathed heavily while approaching the stream to offer her sacrifice. Until the unexpected happened before her eyes. The queen was done offering her sacrifice for the day and was about to leave, and as she lifted her eyes, her gaze was fixed on the goddess, causing her to tremble and fall to the ground out of fear. The goddess smiled at her and used her eyes to touch the queen's hand. "I have seen your dedication and decided to come and have a word with you." That was the exact words of the goddess Alabama. The queen had forgotten that it was the day Alabama would appear in the stream to take a bath. Because queen did not inform anyone about her whereabouts, no one reminded her about the day of Alabama. At least one of the maids would have informed her if they knew she was going anywhere. No one was permitted to see the face of Alabama and live, except the ones she loved, and it was on very rare cases. The queen was scared she would die, wouldn't even having a child. When the queen heard Alabama's voice, she closed her eyes so she would not see the goddess's face, as she was scared of death. She even went on her knees, unable to speak because she knew she had committed an offense by being there at that time. "There is no need to hide your face. I will not harm you. I have seen how dedicated you are, and I have agreed to help you," Alabama said almost in a whisper. but her whisper was like thunder, causing the queen to cover her ears. The queen's lips were shaking, and she could not even thank the goddess as her mouth felt heavy. Even with her eyes closed, she felt the presence of the goddess standing right in front of her. "I have accepted your sacrifices. In the next 3 market days I will give you a child. You already know that my gift is either good or evil, either a blessing or a curse. You should determine which you want, and it will be granted. Don't tell anyone about our encounter. Go back home and celebrate the cry of a baby in your household," the goddess said. The queen ran back home as fast as her legs could carry her, returning to the palace where the king spotted her tiptoeing inside. "Where have you been? Do you realize that today is set aside for Alabama and everyone should be in their respective houses?" The king asked, already flaring up with the fact that the queen had left the palace without informing him and had not adhered to the tradition. After a moment of silence, the queen responded, "My king, the first have just been walking around the palace receiving some air." The king looked at her sternly. He knew she was lying to him, but there was no need to extend the whole conversation. He simply said, "Don't you think a child should be the one walking around in this household and not you?" The words hurt the queen deeply, and she begged to leave the king's presence. When he allowed her to go, she went into her chambers to cry. Then she remembered that she was not supposed to cry. The goddess had asked me to celebrate, she remembered, and started rejoicing and dancing. She did not notice when one of the maidens came in and caught her dancing. "My queen, is there a special occasion?" the maiden asked. The queen was distracted, shivering as she sat on the bed. She suddenly remembered that the goddess said she should not disclose anything to anybody. "How long have you been at the door?" the queen asked. The maid smiled for a moment and then said, "I just came in to find out what you will have for dinner," trying to avoid the queen's gaze. "Just help me ask the king what he would have for dinner and I will prepare dinner tonight. I need to start celebrating before the actual celebration takes place, so don't bother yourself," the queen instructed the maid. The maid, noticing the queen's sudden change in attitude, just looked at her in awe, but then moved to the king's chamber to carry out the task she was assigned, unaware of the surprise that lay ahead for everyone in the kingdom, including the king. Queen Adais prepared the king's favorite meal that night all by herself. It was egusi melon soup with fufu. Although she did not let the king know she prepared it since he was not happy with her, she was scared he might not eat it. "Take it to the king," she commanded her chief maid. The maid hesitated because the king did not want melon soup. Instead, he asked the maid to prepare something light for him. "His Majesty will be upset with me if I present this to him, my queen. The first might even lose my job," she said, not wanting to move. "I know my husband, he can never resist a well-stocked melon soup. Just go and give it to him," the queen instructed. "But my queen, you should be serving him this meal since you know him that well. He won't yell at you or dismiss you from the palace." "I'm just scared. I don't have anybody outside here. I told you I'm an orphan, and if I lose my job, I have lost everything," the maid said in a low tone, and the queen could see tears piling up in her eyes. The king was not an easy person, and everyone in the palace was scared of him, because if a maid or a guard flaunted his orders, such a person would be dismissed from the palace without consideration. The king does not care if such a person is close to the royal household. "Don't worry, I will take it to him myself. I wouldn't want you to lose your job because of me," the queen finally concluded, making the maid give a sigh of relief and then bow to the queen, moving to her the maid quarters. The queen took the meal herself, checking to ensure she was properly dressed. Then she carried the tray with the food inside and walked slowly to the king's chambers, making sure no sound was heard from the soles of her feet. When she got there, she breathed out, then dropped the tray on the floor and knocked. "Who is that?" the king asked. At first, the woman could not say she was the one, as both of them were not on talking terms at the moment. When she went silent, the king also went silent. To him, whoever was at the door was not ready to talk. Could it be death knocking at my door? He asked himself. In the kingdom, whenever a king was set to meet with his ancestors in the final hour, there had to be a strange knock on the door, loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a signal that it was time for the king to depart. During that time, the kingmaker would gather the whole village as they all waited for the final knock for the king to finally meet his ancestors. It was always a sad moment. It wasn't surprising when the king thought it was his time. He had always thought about who would take over his kingdom when he finally leaves. Although he was not too old to die, he was just anticipating the day it would happen. "It's I, Queen Adai," she finally responded. The king completely ignored her at first, then he asked, "Do you have any good news for me? Have you come to tell me that I will have a child before I pass on?" "I was thinking it was my ancestors knocking," he said. The queen stood there confused. Should I inform him about what the goddess said? But she asked me not to tell anyone. The king might not even believe I saw the goddess. Then she suddenly said, "Your food is getting cold, my king." The king was disturbed by the smell of his favorite meal. "Is that not egusi soup I'm perceiving? Bring it into my chambers," he finally said what she wanted to hear. His special guard opened the door, and the queen took the food in. In order not to allow her to see that he would eat the food, he had to dismiss her. "Go, come back when you have better news for me," he said. "My king, should I carry the food as well?" she teased. "Leave my chambers, woman." "Not with the food. I will see what I can do with it." The queen left with a thought. "Soon, my king, everything will be fine, and I will be holding my own child in my hands," she murmured to herself. Then the king called her back. "I have been seeing you walk around just recently. I hope you did not go begging Alabama for a child. You know there is nothing she gives that is ever good," he said. The queen shrugged her shoulders. "I will never do that, my king," she said as she hurried to leave his chambers. It was just as if he had known what she did, and the queen was also scared. What if he heard from someone and not just a prediction? She asked herself. Queen Adiazi could not sleep that night. What if the goddess gives me a bad child? She asked herself. Then, suddenly realizing she was talking about the goddess, she thought, don't say that about her. She appeared to me as a very peaceful and beautiful woman. I just wish my daughter is that beautiful if it happens to be a girl, the queen said, smiling to herself, not noticing when her maid stood close to the door of her chamber to see her laughing. Why has the queen been so happy lately? Well, maybe she is trying to use that to cover up whatever is bothering her. I really pity her. Soon the king will marry another wife, and who knows what will happen. The maid said, shaking her head and then heading to her duty post. While the queen walked to her room, she shut the door. It was just a week to the dance festival that is always done twice a year. It was supposed to be the first one in the year, and everyone was preparing tirelessly for it, including the members of the royal house. It was always fun, as the young maidens would dance and dance to their satisfaction. Some would find suitors there and also get married to them. Visitors from the neighboring village would never miss the occasion, as they would come to witness the wrestling between the neighboring villages, dances, and everything a person could think of. Queen Adias saw it as an opportunity to go back to Alabama Stream and offer a sacrifice, even when she knew her prayers were answered. It was her way of thanking the goddess in anticipation of what was to come and pleading that she would be given a good gift. She prepared a dazzling outfit she would wear, and in line with the tradition, the queen would also have to dance for the celebration to be complete. She had to select an outfit that would enable her to dance well. Queen Adias had been a dancer before she married the king. Whenever she heard the sound of the ujing, she would leave whatever she was doing and dance to it. It got to a point that her father said she was possessed and took her to the village square for cleansing. It was after she agreed to marry him that he stripped her of many things she used to do. She was the head of the maidens in the kingdom and would stay in the front row to dance whenever there was a festival. Her dance caught the attention of the king, and he chose her as his wife, but he had to stop her from dancing so that other men would not have eyes on her. It was the day of the festival, and everything was set in the village square. The villagers gathered to witness the festival. King Ekena and other members of the royal house arrived late, even after knowing that the festival would not commence without the king sitting on his throne with his wife by his side. The queen excused herself to stay back in the palace and adorn herself so that she would appear in her full glory before the people. The king granted her permission, but he asked one of the guards to keep an eye on her. "I don't know what she is up to, just keep an eye on her and report to me if she leaves this palace," the king said, and the guard nodded. He knew just what to do. He hid somewhere and watched the queen as she packed something inside a bag and looked to the left and right. There was no one. She left the palace, following the path to Alabama's stream. She started climbing up the hill like she normally did. Then she finally got to the top of the hill, with the guard following her from behind and hiding whenever she turned. She went and dropped the items for the sacrifice close to the stream, and then she walked back straight to the village square, checking again and making sure no one could see her. The guard took another path and reported to the king, who acted like there was nothing wrong, at least so that the people would not notice. "Are you sure about what you are telling me?" He asked the guard again to confirm, and the guard responded with a smile to confuse the people. "If I find out that you are lying to me, I will cut your head off," the king said, finally asking the guard to go. Shortly, the queen arrived at the market square. She looked beautiful and was glowing, as if Alabama had added more beauty to her. As the villagers sighted her, they all stood up and clapped while she walked to sit with the king. The king did not ask about anything he heard, at least not yet. The festival began fully upon the queen's arrival, and she was asked to dance. The queen started dancing, and it looked as if something was controlling her. All of a sudden, she fell to the ground and fainted. Everyone rushed to pick her up, and she was taken to the palace. As soon as the native doctor touched her, he looked up to the sky and said, "My king, your wife is pregnant, but this child, I can't see clearly. The child might be a curse to this village or a blessing." The king was pissed about what the herbalist said, but he just could not unleash his anger on his wife at the moment because she was weak. "I knew it right from the time this woman started walking around and acting suspiciously. I knew something was not right," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "I will not father any bad child. Even if the goddess wants to make them bad, she should just know it," he whispered to himself, shifting away from the villagers and the herbalist. As he walked back to where the people were, the queen opened her eyes and held her forehead. "What is going on here? And why am I just lying here with everyone staring at me?" she asked, lifting her head to look for the king, who had just come in time. "My queen, it's a long story. The king will tell you everything you need to know later. For now, you need to go inside your chamber and rest," the herbalist said. Everyone started leaving the palace one after the other, with just the king, his guards, maid, and the queen left. The native doctor left with the people. The queen was just too weak to walk, so the king had to let her go inside and rest before speaking with her. He helped her walk inside her chamber and made sure she slept on the bed before leaving to think about everything he had heard for the day. "I know I threatened that I would get a second, third, or even fourth wife who would give me a child, but I did not ask that woman to go begging Alabama for a child. All the children that woman has given to the villagers over the years are either deaf, dumb, blind, or even crippled, or even dead once they are brought into this world. More reason nobody wants to go back for a child. I wonder what will be the fate of this one," the king murmured to himself as sleep took over him. He had a dream where he saw a crippled child crawling towards him with people running after the child. The child was calling, "Papa, Papa." Once the child got to the king, he lifted his hands for the king to carry him. "Carry me," the child said. The king looked to the left, and in front of him he realized that it was just him and the child, and the people pursuing the child had run away. He simply looked at the child, conscious of himself. "May the gods forbid, I'm not your father," he yelled as the child held his leg. He woke up with a scream. "Get away from me, stay away." He shook his right leg where the boy held, not knowing he was doing the same in the real world. He hit his leg on the wall as he woke up, making him more pissed. "That can never be my child. I can never father a cripple," he said to himself. Just then, one of the maids went to inform him that the queen was awake. As she knocked, and while the king was trying to process the dream he had, he let out a scream. "Go away from there," he yelled at the maid, who shivered. As the maid was about to leave, she said, "My king, please, I came to inform you that the queen is awake and she asked me to call you." Hearing about the queen, he responded, "Tell her to come into my chambers now." The queen was still weak, which was why she asked the king to go to her chamber instead, but the maid could not argue with the king. She simply had to do what she was asked to do. As she walked back to the queen's chambers, she knocked. "Where is he?" The queen lifted her head and asked, and the maid stood still for a minute, then said, "He asked you to come instead," ignoring the queen's watering eyes that looked as though she was crying. Then Queen Adias managed to lift her body with the help of the maid, and she walked to the king's chamber. As soon as she knocked and the king's special guard opened the door, the queen lay down on the bed while the king dismissed his guard from his presence by simply waving his hand. "I want you to get rid of that thing inside your stomach this moment. You can take something to get rid of it, else I will use my hands and kill it once it is out of your womb," the king said with so much rage that frightened Queen Adias. "My king, I don't understand anything that was going on here. Were we not supposed to be at the village square for the festival?" she asked him, unable to understand anything at all. Then she held her forehead, frowning. The king gave her a bad stare. "Oh, I see, you are just acting up so that I will not question you. Why did you decide to disobey me? You know I am the most respected king in this kingdom, and even the neighboring villages do not joke with me. But because you know you are my wife and I won't be heartless enough to punish you, you decided to disobey me?" the king asked as he stood up with his eyebrows raised. His face had completely changed, like he was going to pass judgment on the queen, like he normally does with his subjects.